was the husband of Josephine Seelan, the father of Barbara Gormley and Ted Poatsy. The Poatsy family moved from Keystone, West Virginia to a little town in Pennsburg, and it was my grandfather John, my grandmother Mary, my dad Frank, or our dad Frank, and a brother Johnny, and 3 sisters, Helen, Marie, and Elizabeth. And they moved on to Wasner Road in Pennsburg. On February 9th, 1934, my grandparents' house burned. They had a fire, and my grandfather went to wake everybody up to get out of the house. Well, it turned out that my dad was 16 at the time, and he ran from their house to Pennsburg Fire Company to get the fire company, and everybody thought everybody was awake, and when my dad and the fire company came back, they couldn't find Johnny. Johnny had died in the fire, and from that point on, my dad became dedicated to fire companies and fire service. We had a fellow at my dad's funeral that told us that my dad had literally ran from their home to Pennsburg Firehouse, which is approximately a mile.
And in those days, they didn't have sirens. They had a big hammer that they hit a big circle to wake people up. So that affected our father.
In 1940, our dad Frank married Josephine Seelan, and they moved into half of my grandparents' house at 1138 Old Skipback Road.
In Waxhaw.
In Waxhaw, PA. And then on April 1st, 1947, my parents were looking for a hotel, prior to April 1st, but they had settlement on this.
Worked at the upholstery factory, and they sold that, and they bought the hotel. The hotel, prior to Mom and Dad buying the hotel, had a fire. And that fire, if you notice on the hotel when you drive by, the second floor is plastered. And that's because the brick behind it is all burned from the fire. And in the upper right-hand corner or left-hand corner is looking at the hotel. There's no real electric or heat in that part of the building, because during those days after the fire, they just really fixed it up, put plywood up or whatever, plastered it. So that being so, fire with my uncle and my dad's family, fire in the hotel. So at the bar, which was a gathering place, people came and talked. And with the prevalence of fire, the men talked at the bar about starting their own fire service. So informal meetings were here at the hotel for a number of years or months. And eventually, formal fire company papers were drawn up to have the Upper Salford Volunteer Fire Company. A meeting was held in the dining room, the other room attached to the bar room area, and the men had the charter for the fire company, and it was the signing night. Well, the bar was full. My mom, or our mom, was tending bar, and one of the kegs ran out. So she knocked on the door at the meeting. Daddy came out, Frank came out, tapped the keg for her, and went back in. The story goes from mother and father that while Frank was out tapping the keg, the charter was signed. And when he came back in after the charter was signed, he was told that the charter was signed and sealed and that he could be the first member. Very interesting point of fact, he was the first member, not a charter member, despite the charter being signed in his own house.
And this had been a door at one time, this window?
Yes. Yes, that window had been a door prior to the fire. After the fire, the door was changed to in front of the building instead of on the side of the building.
Okay, and here's the front door coming around. And you can see that where that table is, that's about behind there is the dining room. Someone like
Was an informal meeting place for the fire company. The firemen, after they practiced, after they bought their first truck, they had to do a lot of fundraising, so a lot of informal meetings were at the bar. Next door to the hotel was a building owned by the Knights of Friendship. And the big events were in their hall, like turkey suppers, and I don't even know if they had bingo or...
Yeah, we did. They had all kinds of fundraisers, bingo, turkey suppers, the elections were held up there.
Elections were held up there, so that was the town center next to the hotel. Because the Southville Hotel was a formal hotel, and people did stay here now and then,
Yes.
there was somebody here all the time. So the fire company, or Frank and Josie, volunteered or were drafted to have a telephone, which back in the day, even when I was here, were some of them were party lines, but this was a dedicated line on the stairway at the top of the stairs, a dedicated line for fire company calls. So it was the advertised line. So Frank and Joe became really the first dispatchers for the fire company.
that's neat.
Go ahead.
We had a siren up on the chimney outside, and there was a switch out on the porch, on the wall here, to blow the siren, and then later the switch was put in here behind the bar to make it more convenient and quicker to blow the siren once they received a call to that there was a fire somewhere, to dispatch the firemen.
Now, it was interesting. The switch outside also remained, because that was a place that if somebody saw a fire, they could run to and flip the fire switch. So the public could also call a fire if indeed there was a fire. Interesting, once the siren went bad up on our chimney, the men, a lot of them that worked for the electric company, put a siren down at the fire hall, which is in its 75th year, as we all know, on a telephone pole or on the building down there. Those men from the electric system strung wire to the switch, put the switch here, so that daddy can still answer, mom and dad can still answer the calls, come down, and the siren, siren would go off at the firehouse. And also in the front of the firehouse, there was an alarm switch also, so the public could, and I think they eventually took that outside switch away. But it was a little interesting from the siren being on the top of this building, on the chimney of this building, to down there, and they made they were advanced enough to have a switch here that could turn something off 500-600 yards away, which was pretty. So that was so they were the fire dispatchers till, I guess, Montgomery
County came into effect, and every Saturday at noontime, my dad would Frank would test the siren by pulling the switch either outside or inside.
Every day at noon?
Every Saturday at noon, right at noon.
Well,
he would test it.
Sometimes his son got to pull the switch, and he was told when to turn it off, so that was a big kick. It was Saturday, test the siren.
And it was to make sure that it worked, that there were no birds making nests in the siren or anything else. So it was, that went on for many years. I think it was sometime in the 80s. I'm not sure when Montgomery County dispatchers came into effect.
I was really young, and it was really because the switch was at my eye level at the point. But do not touch that phone at the top. You can have your fingers smacked or your rear end tanned. I don't know why, I just got a wild hair in, and I went down to the firehouse and I wanted to see if that switch worked. So I pulled the alarm at the firehouse, and these firemen came, and at that point they didn't call the cops or whatever. They said there's no fire. I just didn't know what to do. I was scared. When I was scared, I came home. My dad grabbed me by the shirt, came home, and he made sure that I remembered this incident and that I couldn't sit down for a couple days, and that I would never ever do that again, pull false alarms. So that's one of my stories of the fire company. Another story that I remember is Daddy was the treasurer for the Upper Southwood Fire Company. And so before meetings, when checks needed to be written and stuff, Dad would sit over there with Mom, and they would write all the checks and pay all the bills, and then they'd go to the meeting and report the bills and checks that were paid. So that was, once again, you just, as a community, you just did what you had to do to keep everything operating, which was what's going on. Besides dispatchers, Daddy was a fireman first. And back in the day, this is a quick ad-lib, back in the day, down at Spring Mountain at the dam, the fire companies would get together to practice, and they would have a water battle. They'd have this sort of drum in the middle of the wire.
Okay.
And they would
Two
challenge
teams.
each other to see who could get the spinner to whichever side.
It was a tug of war, but you
Right.
had to move it with the hose.
Right.
So opposing fire companies, and believe it or not, Daddy, which sometimes I refer to as the old man, was pretty damn good at it, and they would win a bunch of times. So he was good as a nozzle man, especially in that. So then after that, as he aged, he became
Fire police. And after fire police, he was elected fire police captain at one point. And he served as fire police captain for quite a few years too. So then we'll move on to November 24th.
No, wait a minute, let's wait.
Okay,
Okay. One of the things that was important was people would come and get a 6-pack and a Poatsy's pizza. It was a cheap Friday night treat for the family. They would come and order a Poatsy's pizza. They'd order 1 or 2 12-inch pizzas, take them home and get a 6-pack, and that was a family treat. Back in...
So when did that start, the Poatsy pizza piece?
Oh, whenever the vendor came and sold them the oven,
Yeah.
and that was when I was growing up. So it was probably in the 60s.
Okay.
late 60s.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
before the pizza.
70s.
Well,
Well,
that's where we're going.
60, yeah, it was probably the mid-60s.
So the firemen used to have a fundraiser at Lilyput Farm, and it was a horse show. And Daddy would go down there and have a trailer and serve sodas like he would serve beers here. So I met some people, especially Lois family, who's been very good to the township by donating the park, and some friends for years.
Right.
So once the folk festival started, it was a bigger fundraiser than the horse shows. But one of the items was that the township at that time didn't want anything to do with the folk festival because it was very controversial. So the township negotiated with the Folk Song Society to have the Upper Southwood Fire Company be the only food vendor inside where the shows were.
And the other vendors that were in the parking area and stuff were all non-volunteer organizations, like Skip Back Ambulance and I forget who Lower Frederick had their breakfasts.
Okay.
So, but in planning the food, hot dogs and hamburgers were fair that day. There was a novel item called pizza. So they brought Poatsy's Pizza down to the folk festival as part of the fire company fundraiser. So for years, Daddy would go down there, and I guess Mom would help, or Mom would
No,
stay
Mom
here.
would stay here.
Mom would stay here and operate. We always had a dual operation going, and Daddy would make the pizzas and they'd sell, and they were very successful. Then when they moved, the Folk Festival was originally at Spring Mountain, and then it moved to where we see Raymer Field is, and down the Perkiomen Creek behind the Township Maintenance Building. They were the first couple folk festivals that moved from the ski slope. And that was the Pool Farm, but that was the side of the Pool Farm that the township purchased.
The southern side.
On the other side of the railroad tracks, and it was railroad at that time, was the current location, the old Pool Farm, is now where the folk festival is located, and each year the festival is there. The firemen moved from a small stand to a more substantial structure, and they had a room attached to the substantial structure that was temporary, was up and down, but was the pizza room. And Mom and Barbara and me and our kids made pizzas there. Mom essentially manned the ship, the pizza ship, for 40 years, and Barbara took over from there.
Well, I took over before that. Mom worked in the pizza kitchen. My dad wouldn't let us go, Mom and I, to the folk festival in the very beginning because of everything that was going on, the marijuana and the nude bathing in the Perkiomen and what have you. So he said that was no place for a woman to be, so we weren't allowed. But then when it moved up to the other section of the Pool Farm, there was also, besides the structure, it was a big tent that covered the structure that we were in. And I started probably in 1970 to help Mom, and the Ladies Auxiliary ran the pizza kitchen with my mom as chairperson for 40 plus years till I retired in 7 years ago, which would have been whatever. But anyway, we did the pizza kitchen for years, and we were very successful. It was a good fundraiser in the beginning when it was just us and the Skipback ambulance in that area, which they fed the volunteers. We used to net $10,000 in the pizza kitchen alone.
Wow.
But then when the Folk Song Society got all the extra vendors in there, it cut into our sales quite a bit.
So it was quite, but you can see Mom and Dad were both life members. Barbara's a life member.
My daughter's a life member.
Daughter's a life member, my wife's a life member, and I'm the only one that does my community service in a different way. I'm a township supervisor for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
So, okay.
But the pizza kitchen eventually stopped. The firemen stopped using the pizza as a thing. They sell other things at the festival. But you can see how the donation of talent to bring something for the betterment of the community.
Yeah, well, how old were your mom and dad in terms of when they got married? What was their age?
Mom was 22 and Dad was 24. My mom was born in 1918 and Dad was born in 1916, and they got married in 1940.
Yeah, Daddy had a cool birthday. April 4th, 1916, 4/4/16, so it's easy to remember.
Oh, isn't that neat?
Which is pretty cool.
So when you think about them meeting and coming together, they were relatively young. I mean, it wasn't like they were in their 50s or 60s or anything. We're talking young people that had a commitment to where they lived.
Because one of the successful things they did, and this was before everybody studied marketing or whatever, but the bar, as probably seen in this, we're sitting behind the bar, and you can see the big windows. In order to pay the mortgage, they need to have customers and sell beer and whatever. So Daddy enjoyed, and he was always here. He was a fixture here. People would come and say hello to Frank and Joe all the time, but mostly Frank. And they purchased one of the first black and white TVs with a screen about this big.
10-inch screen.
10-inch screen, and what they did was they put it behind the bar so people could drink beer and watch television. back in the day, there were these Friday night fights. Joe Liston, Joe Lewis, Sonny Liston, and they were big, and the community really was interested in fighting. So on those Friday nights, they would have the fight on, and people would be outside the windows. They'd be selling beer outside the windows, so if they couldn't see, they could hear the fight live over the TV, which led to the Salfordville Hotel having the first colored TV in Upper Salford. And once again, that was the day when there were sporting events and it would attract people to the bar. And it's a different society today. Back in the day, people would come after work, have a beer, and then go home for supper, and the world was just different. But when these events on TV and stuff, and once again, it was nice for Daddy because he was always here, so we'd always watch the news. But Daddy, another thing about the hotel, Daddy was very cognizant of fire. And in those days, people smoked at the bar. So Mom and Dad would close the bar around 11 o'clock or 11:30. Daddy would watch the news and the sports, and then he would have a Miller's pretzel can, and he would empty religiously every ashtray into the can, put the lid on so it was airtight.
So there wouldn't be any
So there
fire.
wouldn't be any fire.
Right,
Wow.
But it was smart,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
but we were afraid of fire.
Absolutely. And rightfully so, given the history and the fact
Well,
that
there were some of the old-fashioned copper fire extinguishers, but there were no fire alarms, and there were no,
sprinklers.
No,
no sprinklers.
No.
We didn't have public water, so we didn't have sprinklers. So, but it was some of the things. But the TV and the made out of brick. This is an 1834, 1832 building, and there's 3 stacks of brick put together, so the walls are like 12 inches, and you can see from the windows and the door how thick it is. So, but unfortunately, it is called soft brick. So you can take a nail and scrape it, and it can come. So, as you see people scrape the grout in and put re-grout, you can't do that to this building. So.
Gotcha.
That's a minor historical.
okay. So now we're to the end of the story, I guess you'd say. On November 23rd, Saturday, 1985, the siren went off, and my dad was sitting over there by the table, and watching television, and he got up, the fire alarm went off, he got up to go and answer the fire call, and he had a massive heart attack and collapsed. My mother called, and Frank and I came up and did CPR. They called the ambulance, 911 at that point, and my dad was breathing and alive when the ambulance got here. It was a terrible foggy night, and the ambulance took him to the hospital, and my husband went home to stay with the kids, and my mother and I went to the hospital, over to Grandview Hospital. They had my dad on life support, but as soon as they would take the life support off, his breathing and heart would stop, so they had to put it back on, and they did this for several hours. They finally came to my mother and I and said that the only way that he could live was with the life support, and we said he would never want anything like that, so they pulled the plug, and November 24th, in the early AM, he passed away.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, I was not here. I had taken a job in New York City, and that Saturday night I was out to dinner with some friends, and we stopped at somebody's apartment to have a drink, and I was looking at the Chrysler building. And the Chrysler building went out. The lights went out. About 11 something. And I thought that was really strange.
Was that about the time when the fire call?
No, the fire call was 10:45, so,
Well,
About 11
but
o'clock.
yeah, so, yeah.
It was
in the
really,
neighborhood.
it was, so, by the time I got home from New York, he had passed. So it was difficult. We didn't have cell phones in those days, so they really couldn't communicate with me. So it was quite a long ride from New York City to Allentown. To our dad and mother dedicated their life to the hotel, but also to the Upper Salford Fire Company for years and years and years. And Daddy was a member of the Lower Frederick, the Pennsburg Fire Company, the Green Lane Fire Company.
Red Hill. He joined multiple fire companies because his life was dedicated to the fire service.
And the memory of his family.
Right.
Yeah, and
So-
a lot of them, of course, preceded or predated the Upper Salford Fire Company.
Right.
So like the Green Lane one, the
Right.
Schwenksville one,
Right.
that they all predated. So
So,
we were able to learn from them.
right.
And so,
Right. So-
do you know anything about the fire call that he was going to? What it was to
No,
or anything?
I think it was an accident, but I'm not 100% sure. At that time, he was a fire police, so he was going to help because it was a very foggy night. And
And
I'm not 100% sure, but, and
was
I
a-
don't know if the records, would be available from back then. That was 1985.
Mhm.
it
So,
was, Mom said to me at least that, when he got up, he said, "Oh, Mom, I guess I should go," because it was 11 o'clock, close to their bedtime, the whole 9 yards. So he got his hat and his jacket on and his keys, and on his way to the door, that's what happened.
so, then on October 12th, 1986, in Emmitsburg, Maryland.
National Memorial Service, firefighters service facility is there. And because Frank died on his way to a fire in the line of service, he was honored.
They have an annual memorial service every year for firefighters that had died in the line of duty.
From
And-
across the United
Yes,
States.
it's a national cemetery.
So,
And there's a monument down there for each year, and the firefighters that were, died during that year in service are on each monument. There are many monuments, and there are pictures. I have a set of pictures I have to give to the Historical Society that shows his name on the monument, and we have a picture of him, in his uniform. But
Mom, Dad, and myself, Frank, David, and Michelle went down there. I was engaged to Mary Ann. She just,
it's a very, very impressive service, and it's also, we have a plaque that I have to get, not a plaque, a presentation from President Ronald Reagan that I have to make copies of to give to the fire company and to the Historical Society. That I have, I have to get copies made so that everybody will have a copy of it for their history.
but it was a solemn ceremony.
It was very sad. This has nothing to do with Upper Salford, but there was a barn fire over on Route 73, and Tom Foy from Lower Frederick Fire Company died that same year.
So both.
Foy Park.
Foy Fire,
Yeah.
in Lower Frederick, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he died in the summer, and our dad died in November.
And
And both of them were honored down there.
Yeah.
had they both worked together with the Lower Frederick, like your,
I don't think my
Through the
dad went
years?
to that barn fire.
no,
over
but
there
through
at
the
that
years,
point.
they
Yes,
would have.
Lower
been
Frederick.
good, yeah.
Tommy Foy was a young
Guy, yeah, he was
a young
he
kid.
was only in his,
Really,
late teens or early 20s.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
yeah. So
he
it
was
wasn't.
just very young.
Yeah, but he
So.
he got killed in the fire. So,
Yeah.
but the positive is, they're still involved in the fire company.
Yeah.
I'm doing my thing. And sorry, side note, little kid running behind the bar, the men. Many times in organizations there are discussions, maybe agreements, maybe disagreements, maybe a lot of disagreements. So as growing up, I listened to a lot of those disagreements. So I chose not to be part of those disagreements and do my public service a different way. Despite everybody being part of the fire company, and I do support the fire company behind the scenes that a lot of people don't realize or understand. So I'm all about the community.
Before I forget, there was information regarding the fire dams
Yes.
Yeah.
and how they came to be. Could you
Yes.
give us any information on that?
I have no idea how they came to be, but they were there and they were used. In fact, there is a spring on Ted's property that was also used to get water out of.
So here's
For
the
the fire.
situation. That was a WPA project. So it was a make-work project by the federal government. That thing is 14, 20 feet deep. It's a huge square swimming pool. Growing up, I used to go down and they had chicken wire over pipes. And I used to go lay on top of the chicken wire and throw things down at the frogs and stuff.
Yeah, well, there were fish in there at one point in time.
It got very rusty, and if I would have done that later on, I would have fallen and nobody would have ever found me. The fire dam is between two properties. Half of it is on the property where I built my house, but my parents owned, and half of it is on the farmer next door. So the fire company needed a water source. It's before Shelley Square, fire hydrant, whatever. So the closest is the creeks, and this creek down here, you have to go all the way down to Spring Mountain to get water, really water out from the Perkiomen or the East Branch. So the fire company came to us and the township, and from there I talked to the neighbors at the time, and they agreed that if we could put together an agreement between the neighbors, Poatsy's, and I think
Arbors.
no, it was Grissom's.
Oh.
It was
I
Lee
thought-
Grissom, yep.
I thought it was before, okay.
And so we signed a 25-year lease for the township to own that fire dam and repair that fire dam. So we got a fire dam that needed repair, and the township would repair it for a source of water for the fire company. So they put all kinds of nozzles and stuff, and the township put a steel roof on top, so the water would come off the roof and feed the water dam. And there's a spring that comes through and feeds that water dam. So it's constantly filled with water, and it's called a dry hydrant, not a fire hydrant, but a dry fire hydrant. So they can come there, there's not the water source is nature, springs and rain. You come there, fill up. So for many years, they use that cold spring water to fill the swimming pools as a fundraiser, and the water would just recharge. But no, that was a deal that I signed
Okay.
with that way. So it's a public service, it's good for the township. So when my insurance goes around, and at that time, the township had the Spring Mountain House, was still up, it was a wood structure, and when the fire company would have practices, they would 7 fire companies with a tanker relay,
Right.
and
To
they
be
were
able to
aware
take
of water sources. So that was our contributions, although it's a quiet, nobody knows about it, but it's something that the Poatsy family and the Grissom family did on a quiet basis.
Very
And then
nice.
the agreement has been renewed once or twice, I think just once. So for another 25 years. It's a type of thing that if you make an agreement and you don't like it, you gotta wait till the end of the agreement to terminate it. And the truth of the matter is they don't use it very often because now they have other water sources there.
They're
So,
public.
but that's a good point, we forgot about that.
Right. And this, I believe, might have been a telephone. In the box telephone.
So it's really just facing
Does it
Old Skidback Road.
Yeah. So these are the wires that went up to the ceiling. This is a twisted pair. Well, maybe that was for the new. But this definitely was where you flip the wire. Remember, I was only this big, so I couldn't get to it.
Okay, this shows where the siren would have been, above the S at the peak. And also it shows where the fire had been.
This corner of the property.